Hey, welcome back to our program. You know, Mike, we have a really exciting guest today, and I've been looking forward to discussing with her. Um,
It's a little bit different than what we've been doing,
yeah, yeah,
but
but
nonetheless valid.
well, and that deals with astrology. Pamela Gregory. Pamela has been involved with astrology. She has a passion, and she's been working for 40 years involved with that. Very early in her studies, she realized what an insightful tool, and I want to underline tool, because it is one of those things in our lives that we can sort of sit back and understand better who we are, what we're doing, things of that nature.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we can discuss with her, but
yeah, yeah.
So how did you get interested and start into astrology?
Well, it was real serendipity, really, Mike, because after university I emigrated to Toronto and I happened to join a yoga class. And there was a guy there that someone mentioned to me was an astrologer. So at the end of the class, I went up to him and said, look, I know absolutely nothing about this subject, but I'm really interested in having my chart done. So I went to see him the following weekend and was blown away by the information he was able to share with me. He could pinpoint specific dates in my life and qualities of experiences that I'd had then that he couldn't possibly have known any other way. And it was like I still remember that moment, all of those years, 42 years ago, sitting in his tiny flat in Toronto, and it's like the world had just cracked open to reveal a whole other universe of meaning that up to that point I'd been unaware of. And from that point, I haven't stopped learning. Because it's a language. It's not a psychic skill, not a clairvoyant skill. It's a language which is mathematical, symbolic, profound, and you have to learn the rules of the language. So from that point, I haven't stopped learning. It was so inspiring.
You know, for most of us, we look in the newspaper and we see charts on our natal charts. I think
Just like 3 sentences, and this is your week.
Yeah, and one chart, since I'm a Virgo, one chart I read, all of us were sick that day. So there's a 12th of the population we were sick. So
I don't know if you get it a lot, but hey, what's your sign?
I'm a Pisces. I'm a Pisces sun and moon, but if it was really as easy as your sun sign, it wouldn't have taken me 42 years, and I'm still learning every day. So, it's way more complex than that. And in the Western world in general, I think astrology is probably still the most misunderstood alternative discipline, because in general, all people know about their birth chart is their sun sign. So it just isn't that simple, as Patrick has said, to divide the whole population into 12 neat segments and everyone's having that same experience that day. So when I prepare a chart for a client, I spend up to 10 hours looking at this multi-dimensional series of matrices, really, which form a hologram of information, which is highly mathematical, highly symbolic, and I'm sifting through all of that information to eventually come up with a synthesis of meaning, which represents where the person is in their life at that moment. And what's fascinating is that the birth chart is like an acorn. Just like the acorn contains all the information, tiny though it is, for it to grow into an oak tree, and it's already encoded in that acorn. Our lives are very much encoded in our birth charts, but I want to sort of clarify that, because it isn't, it gives you the unique sheet of music, if I can use another metaphor, unique sheet of music, which is set for your life, but it does not give the level at which you live it. It doesn't. It's our level of consciousness that determines the level at which we live it. But that's how, because that piece of music is a set piece of music, if someone comes to see me, whether they're 15, 25, 85, 95, I can see where they are in the unfoldment of the acorn, as it were, and know at this point in life this is what's happening. And if it wasn't encoded in the birth chart, I couldn't do that. So, yet way, way, way more complex than than just your sun sign. I wish it was that easy, but it's not.
And I think that kind of does astrology a disservice because it's so general and people go, well, it doesn't mean anything.
That's true.
And I shout at the television a lot, because it really trivializes something that takes an enormous amount of time to learn. And that's why, frankly, there are not many well-qualified astrologers, because a lot of people drop out because it's a very demanding discipline, really. So, but it's worth sticking with. And, I will go on learning every day till the day I pop my clogs, and probably a few more lifetimes to come as well. Absolutely.
So what do you think about like predestination versus free will? If this chart is laid out, is everything that I'm going to do already known, or do I still have choices?
That's a really, really good question. And what's fascinating is, if you see a little baby and the baby looks so pure and innocent and beautiful, and he is, but the birth chart already shows for that baby that he was born into this world with baggage, with issues already built in. There could be issues with the mother or the father or the siblings. And so we already come in with lessons to be learnt. Now, when you're a child, you don't have as much free will because you're very much under the auspices of your parents or school or whatever. As you become an adult, we can start to exert free will, and therefore we can start to have latitude with the way that our chart manifests. For instance, if I'm seeing for someone a Neptune transit come up, very positive, very common with Neptune, that at a lower level of expression, people will get weepy, droopy, depressed, in a fog, don't know who I am, don't know where I'm going, I've kind of lost the plot, lost my energy. If I can explain to them that if you use that energy positively to do something creative, paint, write music, listen to music, write poetry, or do something spiritual like meditation, it uses up the energy positively, so it doesn't have any opportunity to manifest negatively, because the music has to play somehow. So much better that it plays positively, and you remove the chances of it messing up your life, of playing negatively. So that's where astrology can be incredibly practical in alerting people to the maximum potential of any particular transit that's coming up for them. So, in answering your question, our free will has greater and greater latitude once we understand our maximum potential at any moment. So astrology helps us to be the best we can be, if you like.
Do you think a parent should order their child's astrological chart, soon, and work with it that way?
Absolutely, because, as any parent knows, particularly a parent who has more than one child, how different their children can be, how different the talents are. But I've done many, many, many charts of babies and young children, and it's very clear to see whether the sporting ability or academic or mathematical ability or scientific ability. And it's so great for a parent to know that in the early stages, because they can nurture that particular gift which is already residing in the child. So you start to work with the universe. The astrology is the language of divine intelligence, I feel. So once we're starting to work with divine intelligence, the universe kind of has our back, as it were. So, I just think it's such an incredibly powerful, useful, practical thing for a parent to do, to get the charts done of their children. Of course, in India, it happens a great deal.
Now, when I see a new parent, I warn them that this new child is not a blank sheet of paper for you to exert your influence on and make, mold into your idea of the perfect child. That you, as much as anyone, are just learning how to live with this other person who's showed up in your household.
Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely. If they're like with my son, he's very stubborn. He was stubborn when he was 1. He's still stubborn, and they don't change. They are their own people.
And I think, it's really interesting, Mike, because what astrology can teach as well for all of us is much greater tolerance, because you can literally see on two pieces of paper how people are coming at issues in a different way. And if you can kind of illustrate it on two birth charts, two pieces of paper, it can really help awareness and understanding and tolerance. Because very often I'm working with couples who are soon to get married, and 85% of the glass may be full and very, very positive in their links between each other. And there may be one element which is kind of out of kilter. It's very interesting. When I was married, many compatibilities with my husband, but one thing was we had Mercury's planet of communication in different signs, and pretty much every time I spoke, he said, "Pardon." Now, I think I speak fairly clearly. He had perfect hearing, but he just didn't hear me kind of first time around. And because I understood the astrology very well, that gave me much greater tolerance of that than I think I possibly otherwise would have. So, it can just identify the slight glitches that you may have within an otherwise very, very supportive relationship. And astrology can help enormously to alert you to those.
Pamela, it's a scientific study of the planets, and I know that for 40 years you have studied the background, the history, things of that nature, and your website is filled with that.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking
information.
astral DNA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit, if you don't mind, how do the planets affect us as human beings? Because many individuals don't necessarily understand if Mars is over there and Venus is down there. How does that affect us?
And it's more than just planets, right? Are there things out farther?
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting. On the radio this morning, I just heard they've discovered there are another 20 trillion, I think they said, galaxies beyond our. So, we are just an absolute dot, pinprick, within the whole cosmos. So, there's sort of two answers to that question, Patrick. So I could take them at two different levels. In terms of what I'm looking at, when I deal with a client's chart, I'm looking at the planets moving around in their orbits in the heavens now and where they all are. And I've got specific astronomical positions for them in the tropical zodiac. And I am looking at where they form geometry, specific geometric aspects to that person's birth chart. And when the planets out there come into specific geometry with the planets in the birth chart, that has meaning, specific meaning. Because Pythagoras said this, that number had a meaning beyond just counting, beyond quantity, that it had a quality. Each number has a quality. So specific aspects, a 90-degree aspect means something very, very different from a 60-degree aspect. They each have very specific meanings. It's part of the language of astrology. So I will be looking at this constantly shifting matrix between the outer there, today, this moment, and the birth chart of the person. So that's how I understand meaning. But you may have meant your question in a much bigger sense about kind of physically, how do they affect us? Because, Isaac Newton was absolutely right. The planets are way too far away for gravity to have any effect, apart from perhaps the moon, which has a strong gravitation on the tides. But really, that's what I wrote my first book about. Because I was constantly challenged by people saying, you don't really believe in astrology, do you? This can't possibly work. And it really, I believe, profoundly works on a quantum basis. That each of the symbolism, each of the sets of symbolism of the planets, and each planet is almost like a diamond, that they're multifaceted, but they have a core meaning of symbolism. And they represent elements of our consciousness. And so each one is very different, and they operate with us in a quantum way, in a way that really my book describes in quite a lot of detail. That, I don't know if I can sort of get into this because it gets quite detailed, but whether you look at the the ancient model of the way reality works back to the ancient Greeks and Plato and even the Babylonians, or whether you look at modern day quantum theory with the work of people like David Bohm, who's professor of theoretical physics at London University, and what he was saying about the way reality works, they were saying exactly the same thing, about there's a higher level of being, which is kind of the divine intelligence or creation potential, and then we fall from that into greater and greater manifestation in our lives. And your birth chart, the pattern in your birth chart, determines the particular likely potential expression of that in your life. If all of that makes sense, it's a bit of a...
Yes, it does. Many times when we get an interpretation, since we are emotional human beings, we tend to put more feelings and emotions into it, and if another person can't necessarily understand that feeling, they start to write off astrology as, well, that's not true. So,
you know, what's fascinating, I think, Patrick, just to sort of add to that answer and hopefully clarify it, is each of the planets represents a pillar of meaning, if you like. And when I'm looking at a birth chart, I'm looking at the underlying pattern of pillars of meaning. And so when a person comes to me feeling, you know, they're living life in a tough way, they're the rubber hitting the road, all these random events that keep happening to them, I can show them very precisely it's not random. You know, this stuff is happening to you because of this symbolism that's unfolding in your chart. Now, there's a much better way to live out this symbolism than you're currently living it. And so if I can explain, just like the Neptune example, if I can explain a very positive manifestation of how they could live it, rather than how they're currently living it, through explaining those pillars of meaning underpinning their lives, then life gets a whole heap better for them. Because I can't tell the particular specific manifestation of each piece of symbolism, but I can clearly see the symbolism that is meant to unfold. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. How long has the world been involved with astrology, and where did it start?
6,000 years ago.
6,000 years.
It began in ancient Mesopotamia, which is ironically now modern-day Iraq. And it really began with the beginning of civilization, with the observation of the planets. I mean, they had no TV, no computers, no, cinemas at that time. So they used to watch the movements of the planets, and they could see out as far as Saturn. And they used to tell each other stories about the gods who lived in the planets, because that was their kind of entertainment, if you like. And mythology and astrology grew up sort of hand in hand from that time, but that was the beginning of writing. It was the beginning of arithmetic and mathematics. So really our civilized world, if you like, began at that time. And then astrology evolved a great deal under not only the Babylonians, the ancient Egyptians, and in fact even in the Islamic world, because they were highly mathematical with algebra, etc., it evolved a great deal there. So, but what was interesting was that astronomy and astrology, again, were hand in hand. If you were an astronomer, you were an astrologer. Galileo, Copernicus, they were astronomers, they were astrologers. They were completely intertwined, because the astrology kind of drove a desire to get specific measurement in the astronomy. So if, in many ways, astrology was the driver for astronomy, if you follow. So, and it was only really in the sort of 1700s that things began to split away and they became separate disciplines. Was it because of the societies getting a little bit more intellectual, better understanding, and they didn't want interpretation, emotional interpretation? It was two things really. It was partly Isaac Newton. Ironically, this is called the Age of Reason, etc. And Isaac Newton was a very clever man, but he worked on his theories, which really described a clockwork mechanical universe. And people at that time thought, he's cracked it. That is the way the world works. And he was right, as I said earlier. Astrology can't possibly work on gravitation. The planets are too far away. So at that point, astrology was kind of dismissed to the periphery of society as poor thinking, superstition, it has no scientific basis, etc. And equally at the same time, there was a split with the church, and it was more, the split with the church was more based on astronomy, because Copernicus and Galileo had been saying that, the Catholic Church had been saying that the sun goes around the earth. You see it every morning, you get up, the sun moves through the sky.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The sun, and for Galileo and Copernicus to come up with their heliocentric theories of, no, that's wrong, the earth moves around the sun, the Catholic Church felt that demoted God's theory. He had created the earth as the central.
That's true.
So they were quite cross about that. So they kind of threw out Galileo and Copernicus. I mean, Galileo was under house arrest for many years, but because astronomy and astrology were so closely linked, astrology was thrown out, the baby with the bathwater as well. So because of those two things, that really caused a split. And to be honest, it's only been quite recently that astrology is having any kind of resurgence from, way, way back in the 1700s. So it's a fascinating time now, and I'm going to act as a kind of mini ambassador to fight the case of astrology now.
Did you work as something else earlier in your life?
I did. I had a couple of incarnations. After university, I worked in advertising, actually. I was a director at a big agency both in Toronto and then in London, and after that I spent 20 years running my own training company, training management people of big companies all over the world how to make more persuasive business presentations. And I loved doing it. I did it for 20 years. It was wonderful to see people grow in just a few days, so I loved that. But all the way through the corporate career, astrology was still very much part of my life, and I kept thinking one day I will just stop the corporate stuff and work full time with astrology, and that's what I'm doing, and I'll do that till the end of my days.
Yeah, I think there's been sometimes people look at world leaders, kind of sideways if they use astrology. I think Nancy Reagan was one.
Yes.
Hitler might have been another one that got advice from astrologers. And do you think the acceptance is growing?
I do, and I'm fighting my corner on this. So yes, I do increasingly. And if the case can be put in an intelligent and articulate way, then you can start to persuade people. But I think what is most powerful is having your own chart done. I could kind of share all the data in the world with you, but I think it's having your own chart done, which becomes a profound experience. Here is someone who's just kind of met you from nowhere, who maybe only knows your first name, and yet can almost read your soul. Who knows you from the inside out, who can see experiences from the age of 2, 3, 4, 5 in your life. Because when a client comes to me, in order to validate their birth time, I will ask maybe 30, 40, 50 questions, depending on their age, of specific months and years, and ask them about particular events that are black and white. Did your mum die when you were 3.5 years old? Did your father remarry when you were 6.5? Did you emigrate when you were 9? Was there a sibling born who was very sick at that time? Very specific. You can't fudge the answer of, well, it was kind of sort of like that. It's a yes or no answer. So in that way, I can know that the birth time is correct. Because if all of those events are working like clockwork going backwards, hopefully they will work like clockwork going forwards too. And that is remarkable, usually for most people, that, as a complete stranger, I can know all of that. And all I'm working with is date, time, place, and they could even make up their name. They don't even have to give me their real name. So that's all I'm working with, because that moment of incarnation determines your relationship with the universe for the rest of your life in terms of pattern. Not level, but pattern. And that's pretty powerful.
And I think like we were talking about earlier about getting your child's your chart done, the best thing you can do is accept people as they are. Just like you're married to somebody, well, I'm going to teach them the best way to do something, but that's against their nature. And understanding their nature, you have to accept that and then learn how to work with it. And that's the best way to get along with people.
Absolutely. It's very, very hard to change other people. We can really only change ourselves, but in changing our attitude to the other person, if there's something that kind of grates all the time, if you can see it in their chart, you think, okay, they're coming from a different place in that dimension of their personality. So, that's okay. What we resist persists. What we can accept becomes much, much more easy to deal with.
Right, because we always think everybody thinks like we do. That's just a smart way of being. But, and we look at criminals and different things, and how could somebody do that? Well, they think differently than we do. So you can do charts for people. How does it relate to, say, countries or the Earth as a planet?
I haven't got a birth time for the Earth as a planet. That's a really fascinating question, actually. I don't know if they have we have tide tables for planets called the ephemeris, and I don't know if they've got one for that far back, but certainly a very interesting question about countries. And this took me a long time to get my head around. How can a country possibly have a chart? I mean, that's just crazy because it's inanimate. But what astrologers do is take very specific moments of kind of incarnational rebirth for a country where a new constitution is set up. For instance, in America, it was the Declaration of Independence. It was the 4th of July, 1776 in Philadelphia at 5:10, that you had the signing of that Declaration of Independence. And so that's the birth chart, if you like, for America that astrologers use. And astrologers will test a country's birth chart to make sure it's responsive to transits. And the American one is very responsive. We have one for the UK, it's 1066 and William the Conqueror, all of that. So we test it, and it's very interesting to observe how countries really, really resonate to what's happening in the heavens in terms of what's unfolding in society for them. It could be the status of a country which changes, the leaders which change, the people who are getting very agitated and stirred up, the economy which takes a nosedive. You can see that very clearly, surprisingly, in a country's chart. So yes, I look at those as well. Absolutely.
You have a couple things available to the listening audience, and it doesn't cost you anything, or it costs you very little. The first is your natal chart. By going into your website, which is listed right underneath your name, individuals can put in where they were born, the time. I myself don't remember the exact time I was born.
I came out and I looked at the clock like, oh.
But it does allow you to sort of estimate a little bit. But you've always recommended the precise time is extremely important. But individuals can acquire a natal chart and see for themselves how that fits in with their life.
Absolutely, and I wanted to make that available to people because I also have a very inexpensive, I deliberately wanted to make it inexpensive so it'd be accessible, a 2-part tutorial video series which people are just loving because every day I have dozens and dozens of people saying to me, so what does that mean for me? Any aspect I'm talking about, any new moon, full moon, so what does that mean to me? Because we're all human beings, we all want to know what it means for us. So for that reason, I filmed this 2-part tutorial video series, and even if you know zero about astrology, because I hopefully explain it very simply and clearly, you can understand from that sort of 30-40 minutes of material exactly how you find these points in your birth chart once you print it off from my website, so I do the whole package, and then they start to understand the meaning for them. And people are loving it, they're starting to see the patterns unfolding in their lives. Okay, it's very simple astrology, but we all start at that point, and it's a beginning of a very exciting journey for people. But just to pick up, Patrick, I sort of want to talk a little bit about the precise time, because so many people say to me, this must be nuts. How, why is the birth time so important? Isn't the day enough? Well, no, it isn't, because in any one day you have a choice of 1,440 charts, because that's the number of minutes in a day.
Well, just looking in the sky, the sun is in a different place, the moon's in a different place, and everything else is moved around in that whole 24-hour time period.
Absolutely, but what moves very fast, there's a kind of clock face to the chart. It has a very, very important, almost like crosswise in a compass, a horizontal axis and a vertical axis, and they move super fast with time. So that clock face moves 1 degree for every 4 minutes on the clock.
Wow.
So if you are 4 minutes out in error on your birth time, if I'm looking forwards for you and anticipating certain developments in your life with a slow-moving planet like Pluto, I could be 3 years wrong in what I'm anticipating for you. So you may say, gosh, I met with that lady in England and, fine, but nothing that she said has happened yet. The big things, nothing's happened. Well, that's because the birth time was inaccurate, and that's why now I always check with questions going backwards in life, because the birth time is so crucial, because you're always going to be slightly off if you've got the wrong birth time. And now if somebody's a little bit vague, if they know within an hour to either side of when they were born, I will do quite a thorough check on all of those questions before I start to work on the chart, because otherwise I'm just wasting my time with the wrong birth time. But the birth time is really crucial, because the axes also describe the biggest life change. It's when planets moving around in their orbit trigger those axes. That's when we have really big changes in our lives, like emigration, marriage, death in a family, that sort of thing.
Now, there's certain friends I have in Facebook talk about, is it Mercury ascending, declining, or that people get a little bit worried about?
Oh, Mercury retrograde. Yeah, it shouldn't worry. All Mercury retrograde means, and it goes retrograde normally 3 times a year for about 3 weeks each. Mercury is the planet of communication. So people really feel during those Mercury retrograde times that communication can go a bit awry, computers go wrong, you lose stuff in the mail. Sometimes that can occur, but it actually is very positive in that it's about going back over things. So wherever it's sitting in your chart at that moment, it is, if you use the 2 letters RE before, researching, reviewing, reevaluating, going back over whatever is topical for you at that time, whether it's writing a book or working on a house contract to sell it, or whatever it is, Mercury retrograde is incredibly useful in checking the detail. So I see it as a very positive thing,
Okay.
not a worrisome thing. It gets a bad rap.
Yeah, my friends are like, oh my God, it's coming. It's going to be a terrible week. And it's like, don't doom yourself.
Absolutely, because you energize the problem before it's even arrived. So
That is very true. You also have a very good book. You don't really believe in astrology, do you? Or did you? Do you? There's a number of individuals that have read the book, and on your website, they give a very positive review of this book.
So with a title like that, what's the basic thing about?
Well, I had to call it that because I've been asked that question 1,000 times. It'd be so interesting if I was at a social event and meeting people for the first time, and if they asked what I did in my first or second career, they thought, obviously this is kind of okay person, but if I tell them what I'm doing now, I as the same person instantly become someone slightly remedial and in need of professional help. So I had to use that question as the title of the book. But what the book covers a lot actually, and I wrote it for people of high interest and low knowledge with astrology, because there are a lot of people out there that are ever so interested but don't have a lot of knowledge, because it's a very complex subject. So But strangely, a lot of people who've spent many years in astrology have really enjoyed it too, because I look at the kind of scale and depth of astrology. So I give many illustrations of what astrology can do, can help you with, can have insights for, etc. But then in the second section, I also start to look at this quantum context for astrology, which absolutely fascinates me, because what really interests me is how reality is formed. That's my real point of focus. How do we form our reality? And that's where I'm kind of digging down a rabbit hole at the moment. So the second half of the book is really looking at that and how I can help people maximize, this sheet of music, how I can get them to move from playing it with a couple of tin spoons on a rusty box to playing it with the London Philharmonic and having a magnificent life. So that's what I hope the book really does for people, to really get them to step into the best that they can be in using astrology both as a spiritual tool, but as an incredibly practical tool as well.
Now, if somebody wanted to learn astrology, and that's not what this book's about, what's the best way? I've looked at some books, and it's like picking up a book on calculus, and I'm going to teach myself calculus, and like, oh God, this is way too deep.
Yeah, and I think it's quite hard to learn from books because there's so much of the subject. At the back of the first book I've written, I've actually got I've listed a series of professional organisations in several major countries like Australia, America, the UK, etc., which are very good teaching organisations that give certification, etc. And if anyone wanted to learn it, many of those courses are now online, so you don't even have to shift your geography. You can study with them and get proper qualifications at the end, and some great ones in America. So I'd really recommend doing it properly, because there's so much to the subject. It's hard to just pick up on your own, I think.
Well, you had mentioned that there are 3,000 different parts to really going into developing a chart. And, we had one individual that was curious, is she going to tell about, predict about this or that? And it takes 10, 12, 14 hours just to do one chart, if you do it properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really, I don't want to go for volume. I'd much rather help fewer people at a deeper level, but really shift something for them, than just do kind of one chart after another. I'm much more in the business of putting on light bulbs and really helping people transform. But you can see how the booking horizon then gets a bit silly, because
sure,
I have 2 or 3 clients in a week, plus all the videos, writing a second book, the 6,000 word newsletter every month, and the social media stuff, and life gets very full indeed. So that's why I've actually sadly had to put a notice on my website saying, for the moment, no new clients until I've finished writing the second book.
So you do have training seminars or?
No, I have some basic training videos, and ultimately I will teach. Again, I did run a little school of astrology myself some years back, but life is just too busy, too full. But because I've been incredibly blessed in my life with world-class teachers, I just have to be in the right place at the right time for some outstanding teachers, many of whom have passed away now, that I feel obliged to eventually put all that knowledge back to the world. And I will eventually teach, but it certainly won't be for the next couple of years, because my next 2 years are full up already.
I have an interesting question. There are those individuals that have followed numerology, and basically different numbers have different meanings.
Like putting your whole birthday and taking it down to a number, and all those different things.
Would you care to comment a little bit, because astrology does deal with scientific, sacred geometry, numbers and things of that nature. Any thoughts on that?
It's a very interesting question, and it's back to the Pythagoras philosophy of each number has a quality of meaning beyond just being a number of counting. But I personally don't know anything about numerology. I'm sure there are many, many connections, because at the end of the day, everything connects. Every paradigm like this connects up. But I don't have any personal knowledge or experience of it. But I know it's a very highly regarded discipline as well. So if I got together for an evening with a numerologist, I'm sure we'd have fascinating conversations about.
Oh, I think that would be great. I would, we have a variety of different guests coming on our shows, and each one, I truly believe, has spent a lifetime of really understanding their part of how we can better grow as people. And so we're looking for a variety of different guests and one of those would be a numerologist who basically understands. Would you mind going through some of the major planets? Like for instance, I'm a Virgo. You are a Pisces.
Like my planet Pisces is Neptune, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Would you care to just share on a very general terms and this is very, very general, what each one of those planets mean?
Yep. And in fact, at the front of my book that's out now, I have a whole chart on the meanings of the planets. But each planet, essentially, as I mentioned earlier, is like a multifaceted diamond. So it has a core symbolism, but there are several possible manifestations of that symbolism. So just to go through them, the sun is your sense of essential self, and it's how your energy is expressed. And how your energy is expressed is very much determined by the sign it's in. If it's in a fiery sign like Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, you're going to, in general, be quite enthusiastic and radiant and warm and outgoing, and there's quite a strong physicality. You might be quite sporty, etc. If it's in a water sign, Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces, you very much live through your feelings. If it's in an air sign, Gemini, Libra, Aquarius is an air sign, not a water sign, you're much more interested in social activity and or ideas, debate, concepts, intellectualism. And if it's in an earth sign like Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, there's an element of part of you being quite practical or down to earth. I mean, Virgo is interesting because it's very tuned into the earth itself and the ancient wisdom of the earth and earth energies and natural wisdom, natural medicine from the earth as well. So that's your sun. Then your moon. The moon is many things. Your moon describes the mother. It describes your experience of the mother when you were young. It describes home and your ideal home. It describes your instinctive response to life. When something happens, just your instinct. And the moon is, because it rules your daily rhythm, is incredibly important with couples who want to live together. Because it's about a daily rhythm. I've known several couples who are kind of madly in love, but because their moons aren't compatible, they just can't live together. They just don't have the same daily rhythm. So that's the moon. It's a very emotional thing, and it's often connected to the past as well. If we're looking into the deep, deep past, the moon is connected to that as well. I won't say too much more than that, but Mercury is the planet of the mind, how you communicate, and each of these planets is going to alter its expression by sign and by which slice of the pie in your house, in your chart it's in, because each slice of the pie has a different area of life, whether it's money, health, whatever. Then there's Venus. Venus is your love emotion, and it's what you need to feel contented and happy in life. It's what gives you pleasure, what gives you joy. It's also, in a man's chart, the kind of woman he'd be attracted to. It describes her. And then Mars is the male principle, the kind of antidote to Venus, as it were. So that is your energy, it's your libido, your ambition, your desire to goal set. And again, that is conditioned by the sign it's in and by house. But that's a real sort of assertive side. And in a woman's chart, it partly describes the kind of man she'd be attracted to. Then we have Jupiter. Jupiter's great. Jupiter's the planet of expansion, personal growth, wisdom, metaphysics, wanting to reach out and better understand the interconnectedness of the universe. It's about higher mind, academic education, long distance travel. So it's a wonderful, expansive planet. Then we have Saturn. So Jupiter's the planet of expansion. Saturn is the planet of contraction. So this is where we feel tight in life, where things don't necessarily flow so easily. It's also where we have to put a lot of work and effort and have responsibility, usually, in their lives. It also describes the father figure and your experience of the father figure. Just like the moon will describe your experience of the mother, other things will too in the chart. Saturn is one of the things that gives you a good idea of what's happening with the father. Then we have Uranus, and that's the planet essentially revolution, awakening, breakthrough. So we've had Uranus very, very active since about April 2011, when the Arab Spring kicked off. And really, we've had some very strong aspects between Uranus and Pluto since that time. So Uranus is a demand for equality, freedom, independence, people rising up against governments, etc. So it's a revolutionary, assertive demand for equality to do with the collective. Then we have Neptune, which is the planet of unconditional love, miracles, spirituality, healing, beautiful. But it's quite ethereal, it's intangible, it's energy, it's misty, you can't get a hold of it. Then we have Pluto, which is the planet of transformation. It also catalyzes and intensifies anything it's in aspect with. When you have this combination, which we have since April 2011, of Uranus and Pluto in a very tight square, very strong aspect, that's where you've had so many kind of people rising up against Pluto, governments, institutions, top-down corporations, etc. And that's continuing through till April next year. I mean, we had a very tight aspect between Uranus and Pluto. I've done a whole chapter on the history of this, but in the mid-60s, 65, 66, when you might remember there were a lot of revolutions, there was, gay rights marches, women's liberation, the Black Power movement, a lot of people demanding more equal rights. And to some extent those were granted, but even now, the issue of black rights in the US is still bubbling up because we've still got this aspect, this demand for equality. So it's a very productive thing, but it's a very powerful thing because it's also to do with personal awakening and transformation, which is what a lot of people are experiencing at the moment. So quite a long answer there. I hope that's covered some of it.
No, that was very good.
Yeah.
And I guess astrologers that haven't thrown Pluto out like some scientists did for a while.
It's been demoted from a planet to a dwarf planet, but it packs a punch. It doesn't matter what they call it. In terms of your psyche, it is one of the most powerful things going. If you're having a Pluto transit, your life is changing out of recognition.
I had the opportunity to listen to one individual, and they were talking about Planet X, Nibiru, and how that was changing the dynamics of astrology. And I
now, is that the planet that's supposed to come through here in the near future?
Yes, I think so.
Is that Nibiru or?
Yeah, Planet X
Yeah, Planet X has certainly been discovered recently, and it's very interesting. It takes astrologers a very long time to get to grips with the meaning. I mean, for instance, Chiron is now it's an asteroid, actually, not a planet, but that was discovered in 1979, and that whenever you get a new planet or asteroid being discovered, there's a new part of our society and our consciousness that starts to open up. So with Chiron, it's very linked to things like chiropractic, alternative healing, because Chiron in myth was a herbalist, an astrologer, interestingly enough, a homeopath. He was all of those alternative things. And those parts of society are now really starting to open up. We've seen a lot more to do with alternative healing since that time. So a new planet or asteroid will always introduce, something new. I mean, when Uranus was discovered, 1781, in the thick of revolutions, both in America and in Europe. So it's the planet of revolution. So we are now finding new planets and new asteroids quite a lot. You know, I'm kind of stumbling across some myself, and I'm doing a lot of research on the internet and just in meditation to try and get the meaning of what new things they're bringing into our consciousness. And I think that's going to be very exciting for us, because I think as human beings we are going to be growing out of all recognition.
Yeah.
Discoveries coming
that's
in
true.
faster and faster.
So I guess you would figure out, okay, it's going to pass through here at this point in time. Then you go backwards and say, well, how often does that happen? And then what was happening at that period in time then, and see now and then and the commonalities.
Absolutely right. That's exactly what astrologers do. They find the orbital cycle and then say, okay, what was happening in history then?
Oh,
You know, with Neptune, when it was discovered, that was the beginning of, you know, the whole spiritualism movement, the Ouija boards and people sitting in trance, because Neptune is to do with altered states. It's also connected with photography and film. That was the beginning of photography. So you always get this correlation of, remarkably, the symbolism of the planet unfolding in society after it's discovered. So yeah, it's absolutely fascinating.
What about comets? Do they play into the charts also? You know, different.
Like Halley's Comet
Yeah.
or different things.
Yeah, I haven't got an ephemeris, I haven't got a tide table for Halley's Comet, and I'm sure everything has an effect, but I don't know, I'm not aware of any astrologer that works with that in terms of knowing the symbolism. So, but you know, there's still so much to be discovered. I feel we're in kindergarten, really in kindergarten with astrology. You know, even though it's very complex and takes years to learn, I feel we've barely started in terms of what's coming for us.
So you've touched on it a little bit. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the time we live in. You know, it feels, you know, people talking about at least the North Pole getting smaller. You know, the climate shifts, volcanoes, hurricanes. It seems like the extreme weather is happening more often, and you know, more turmoil and stuff like that.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, again, this Uranus-Pluto aspect is very associated with extreme weather. Earthquakes, volcanoes, because it's a planet of extremism. And recently, over the last sort of couple of months, Mars, which energizes anything, that has come into this picture with Uranus and Pluto, so it's energizing it. And we saw, you know, that massive Hurricane Matthew going up the east coast of America. Just 2 days ago, we had 2 earthquakes in central Italy, and that aspect between Mars and Uranus is exact now. So that the Uranus-Pluto square continues to run until next April, and as Mars moves out of the picture, Jupiter will come into, if not energize it, then expand it. So I think we're still likely to see more extreme events of that kind. The other thing to observe as well, and I always do video updates every couple of weeks, whenever we have what's called a supermoon, and literally this means that the moon is at one of its closest points in its orbit to the Earth. I mean, sailors know this, that the moon has an enormous gravitational pull on the tides and the tectonic plates. We tend to get much, you know, spring tides, much bigger tides at times of supermoons. But they can also bring very extreme weather events as well, simply because of the pull that's happening on the Earth. So that's another thing to be aware of. But I think in general, the extremes with weather and the Earth may continue for quite some time, possibly up to 2020 is my feeling, because we are altering a lot of things in the natural patterns of the Earth, and I think we either as a society choose to dominate the Earth or we live in harmony with it, and that choice is going to become more and more stark as we move towards 2020.
So you think that the weather will start to like chill out a little bit past 2020?
Certainly, I think there's going to be a different world then. It's very interesting. Several planets, very important planets, move into the sign of Capricorn. And Capricorn is to do with big business, big corporations, big government, any controlling or autocratic or top-down organization that you feel is kind of dominating society or controlling society in any way. And there comes a kind of pivot point in 2020, and I think it's building already actually, where people either decide to go with that or to challenge that kind of vertical structure in society. And many people, I think, increasingly are going to be saying, do you know what, I'm not sure I want to live that way anymore. I may want to live in a different way. And this is really kind of going back to the echoes of the 60s, where we had peace, love, and people living in community. We're going to have a kind of vortexing up from that point, an advance from that point, but people wanting to live possibly off-grid, possibly in some kind of community where they can have a more equal structure to society. And I think we're going to see more and more of that, particularly by the end of 2020. We've got Jupiter and Saturn going into Aquarius, and that's the collective. That's a whole new world where you can move out of so much density and kind of leave a lighter footprint on the planet, as it were. And I think there's going to be a real push in that direction.
You know what that is? That's the next election cycle. November 2020.
For USA.
Right.
Enough, I think.
Pamela, we only have a few minutes left, and I know that there's a wide variety of different things you have not even touched upon, but what would you like to leave with the listening audience when it comes to astrology?
I think what I'd like to leave more than anything is to correct this misperception that astrology is psychic or clairvoyant. It isn't. I mean, I'm intuitive, so are you, so is everyone to some degree. That's not what I'm working with. I am working with a very disciplined mathematical language. It's profound, it's symbolic, I feel it's sacred, I feel I'm holding sacred space when I'm with a client, but it's a language. It's a language, and I'm a translator. I'm not sitting there with a crystal ball, hearing voices and seeing visions. Wish I did. Sadly, I don't. So I think that's one of the really big things I'd like to say.
And again, on your website, you have some really good information for individuals that have a little knowledge or no knowledge, and you presented it in such a way that it's not, it's for everyone to look at. Here's the facts, just like you do on your charts. Here's the facts. You choose. And your book, again, you don't really believe in astrology, do you? And
Maybe.
I think it's a fascinating book.
Is it a belief?
No, it's a language.
Right.
It's a language.
Absolutely. It's not a religion. It's a language. I can feel that same clunking in my head, that process, whether I'm translating French or astrology. It's really, after 42 years, it's a language. And that's, a really important point for people to understand. And
Okay.
it's different people from other disciplines.
So you said you're not taking new clients right now. If somebody wants to get their chart done and talk to an actual trained astrologer, where should they go, or what resources should they search for?
In every country, there will be an association of properly qualified professional astrologers. Just Google it, just internet search it. And then you can go to someone who is properly qualified, properly trained, and hasn't just done a kind of weekend course, because the psyche is a delicate thing, and you should have properly qualified people dealing with it. So that's the best place to go, really. I often recommend people to another very good astrologer who's English, Barbara Goldsmith. I often recommend my clients to her when I'm just completely overloaded, as I am at the moment. So, but or get a recommendation from someone that you feel is reliable yourself. So
if someone contacted you and asked where they should go, you wouldn't mind directing them to someone or on a general basis?
I'm happy to do that. I'm getting on average about 300 emails a day now.
Oh.
So, it takes me quite a while to work through those before I start my day's work. But, Barbara Goldsmith would, yes, certainly be someone I would recommend. Yes, who's very good and very experienced at what she does.
Okay, all right. Pamela, I really appreciate your coming on our program. I hope that we will be able to have you come back when your time is a little bit freer and share some more information.
Fantastic. That would be an absolute pleasure. And I thank you for the opportunity. Anytime I speak about astrology, I'm thrilled to get the word out. So it's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Mike, I think I can't wait to read your book.
Yeah, it's been a very eye-opening show.
Yes.
And
yes.
thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.